Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Nick Williams, who holds a PhD in biological sciences and has worked in the pharmaceutical industry. Nick first became aware of the trans issue in 2017 and now works full-time as director of Fair Play for Women, which was set up to organize a street campaign to raise awareness during the public consultation about GRA reforms. Now grown into an influential and successful volunteer organization providing advice to policymakers on how to fairly balance the rights of women and people who identify as transgender, Nick works on big campaigns to keep women's spaces male-free, to include prisons, sports, and taking the ONS to court to stop them redefining sex in the census. I welcome Nick Williams to Savage Minds. I want to go back to your becoming aware of this issue, the gender debate issue in 2017. What brought you to this issue?
Well, it was accidental, to be honest. I didn't really know anything about it for a long time, and it was a conversation with a friend. She was talking about some things she'd seen on Mumsnet. And she started to say, some women are getting called TERFs, and it was about the transgender issue. And I think my first reaction, I think, is probably the same as many other women. Is, well, what's it got to do with me? What harm does it do? Myself as a lesbian, I sort of felt like I ought to have a kinship with other people that are different. So my first reaction was, well, interesting, but not really nothing really to do with me. But then just the more I talked to her, the more we chatted about it, and I could see then that there were overlaps. There were issues. There were ways that this would be affecting women and lesbians in particular. I think that was what really caught me. And I joined a few groups online, chatted to different people, got involved in the community, and just started to learn, I think, from other people. And I think the biggest shock to me, which I think then sort of spurred me into action, was realizing that nobody really was doing anything about it. There were very few people. There were some notable exceptions. Julie Bindel was obviously speaking about it, Magdalene Burns. But I think what was shocking, and I think what made me angry, was that professional feminists, the women that get paid to run organisations to stand up on behalf of women, weren't doing anything. They'd been taken in by this idea that trans women are women, and therefore they stood for trans women too. And that just left a gaping hole then for the specific issues to do with the sex-based rights of women. And I think I just thought, well, to be honest, if no one else is going to do it, I need to get involved. And I started doing work, just voluntary work, doing some research, writing things, putting things on Twitter, on Facebook, and it kind of started from there, really. But I certainly didn't set out to run a grassroots organisation like Fair Play for Women. But, that's the way life goes, and here I am.
Well, your work in Fair Play has been amazing, extraordinarily, really, because you've reached to some of the key topics that, as they say in internet world or social media world, that turf people or they peak them. One being the sports issue, one being the prison issue. And you have gotten on both, and you've gotten to the roots of a lot of these problems, not least of which is your raising awareness during the public consultation about the GRA reform. And then on the heels of that, looking to how big campaigns are being launched towards certain types of entities, such as the International Olympics Committee, the IOC, or the prison system. How is it that you're taking the ONS to court to stop them redefining sex in the census, for instance, is integral to sports and prisons being kept safe for women? Because these are all very interrelated, and you know this working on the ground. But a lot of our listeners will be back at that step you mentioned 5 minutes ago. What harm is there in just saying she? What harm is there in letting a guy change in the next room or in the next bench over in my gym?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's happened and why this is so dangerous, it's a distorted debate. One group is powerful, one side of the argument is well funded, well represented, given a platform, and the other side, women, we are excluded from that debate. We are denigrated in it. We don't have the opportunities to speak. And so I think one of the things that motivated me with Fair Play for Women was to try to rebalance that, to find a way for the other side to be spoken about, but to do it in a way that was evidence-based, respectful, but rational. Because I think that was what was lacking. What we ended up seeing was a few people. When you get to that point where you're so frustrated and angry that it looks to other people like, we've got crazy women just shouting, but actually it's because we get to the end of our tether. So I wanted to get to a point where actually let's get some evidence, let's have some real talking points, and I want to do this in a slightly different way. So that's the brand, I guess, of Fair Play for Women. It's moderate, it's respectful, it's careful, but it's underpinned by evidence, and the objective is to change the policy. Well, actually, the objective is to make sure women and girls aren't forgotten in policy making. So that was why we chose areas such as prisons and sport, because they're key areas that people can understand, and they are ways where they're issues where women have clearly been forgotten, and we need women to have their voice. And so we wanted to find a way of getting in to sit at the table, to talk about the issues, to rebalance things. But I've mentioned there evidence-based, and Fair Play for Women, that's a really important part to the work we do, is everything we do is evidenced. And I think that comes from my background as a scientist. To me, facts are very important. And I think that was something that I also saw was missing in this debate is, the trans lobby were, well, basically just making stuff up. I mean, that was absolutely outraged, really, that people were trying to convince us of things that had no factual basis whatsoever.
Well, the female penis, you mean?
Well, exactly, yes. It was just ludicrous to me. And I think that made me angry too. That motivated me to get involved, because you have to base the argument on facts. There have to be facts involved. And the lack of facts was a real problem. So that's what I hope that Fair Play for Women could inject really into this issue is some reality, some respect, but also certainty. There are truths that must be held on to, and that's what we will do in a sort of an uncompromising way.
Science matters in this debate, and your being a scientist helps this. But what about, let's go to the sports issue first, because that's the issue which I knew when you were working on this, I thought, well, that's a really smart move, because sad as it is to say, people don't care as much about women being raped in prisons as they do about unfairness, which is a shocking thing for me to say. But we're seeing the evidence right now roll out, right?
Yeah, that's completely true. And I think, we started after GRA reform, after that campaign, we moved into prisons because that was a really important area. But I was absolutely, I was really quite shocked and disappointed really at how little people really care about women in prison. And it was a difficult one to campaign on because, although it was outrageous that men were in women's prisons, it barely registered in terms of outrage in the general public. We had to push really hard, and we still do because it's really important. But something like sport was different because people, for some reason, care about sport more than women in prison. And I think because it touches on people's basic understanding of fairness, people can understand it. People can intuitively realise that it's wrong to allow people who are born male into female sports. It's unfair and it's unsafe. And I think also men get annoyed about it too. Men value fairness in sport. And so it's been something that we can talk to, we can inspire both women and men to be annoyed about and to want to talk about. So it's been a really good reach through issue for us. It's been easy to explain. There have been some great examples that we can hold up for the unfairness. And well, with the Olympics literally around the corner, we're going to see the world peaked, I think, soon when we watch Laurel Hubbard lifting on the stage. Whether Laurel wins or not is irrelevant. Seeing somebody taking the place of a woman, it's visual and it's powerful, and I really hope the world takes notice.
It's phenomenal how many people still think, however, that we're the meanies in the situation. It's shocking to me, and I'm a cultural anthropologist, but oh my gosh, if there was ever evidence for social misogyny, this is it. When you still have people, I'm sure you saw Laura Penny's tweets last week. She's gone into hiding, I believe, but she basically said on the changing room issue that women were at fault for looking at female penises. This is like a complete reversal of what's gone on. Now, in the sporting world, there's been a lot of debate. I wrote about this several years ago, several times. We've got wonderful scientists like Emma Hilton, your work on this. Then you have the bizarre case of Caster Semenya. Now, tell me how it is that in 2021, we're looking at an Olympics where women are being removed, men are being included in women's sports, and then we have various organizations, such as rugby, that are able to say no men and women's sports, where others in other countries as well are saying that's okay. It shouldn't take that much science to show people a fractured skull, as in the Fallon Fox fight that occurred about 5 years ago. So why is it so hard to convince sporting officials, and there is such a thing as sports science? So there are sports scientists who know better. Where is this dilemma having its greatest struggle for us?
Yeah. Well, I've not met a single sports scientist that doesn't know this is wrong. Nobody actually thinks it's fair to allow men into women's sports. It's as simple as that. The problem is that for years, trans lobby groups have infiltrated these organisations. It's a political issue now. It's a PR issue. And so, the inconvenient facts have to be set aside, so that the PR of this issue, so that the sports body can show that they're inclusive, etc., has dominated. And of course, when it comes to people speaking out, there's reputational damage for the individual to do that. It's really hard to stand up against a large organisation that's your employer. So it's not that the science isn't strong enough. It's not that people don't believe the science. It's that people can't afford to believe the science. They have to put it to one side and they have to follow the new orthodoxy, which is that trans women are women and therefore they should be in women's sport. And there's an awful lot of frustration behind the scenes. But few people dare to speak out. And I think, that's the point of Fair Play for Women, in a way, is we say the things that can't, that we say what's the taboo, because it's a taboo these days to say that trans women are male, and I've been in policy meetings with different national governing bodies of sport, and I've used that phrase because after all, it's the crux of the issue, isn't it? It's the very reason why a trans woman shouldn't play women's sport is not because this person is transgender, it's because they're males, and you have to name the problem. So I insist on using that word. But I've been told in meetings, please don't use that word. It can feel offensive. It can feel unsafe for some other people. And I have to say, but sorry, you've invited me here today as the representative of women, and I'm here to speak on behalf of sex-based rights. That's what I come and do. And the words male and female, I can't do my job if I don't use the words male and female. So I'm sorry, although I say it with the greatest of respect and I understand it might be painful for some people to hear, it is true that trans women are male, and we have to, in a policy meeting, talk about those facts. Fine, on the street, if there's a trans woman walking down the road, I don't feel compelled to shout at that person is male, because in social life, there are certain things we do and we don't do. But in a policy meeting, when we're actually weighing up the way a policy would impact different groups, we have to speak the reality. We have to be grown up enough in those policy meetings to understand that it's not personal.
Well, you were invited to World Athletics in Switzerland to talk about the rules for trans athletes. You were one of 30 people present. Can you talk about what happened at that meeting? And were you also asked not to refer to these men as males?
Yeah, it definitely happened. I was invited to that meeting through, I managed to invite myself and I couldn't be refused. It was one of those persistent things. They didn't really want me there. But what it was World Athletics was trying to trying to bring together other sports, other international federations, all into the same room to talk about this knotty problem of trans issues and what should the rules be, because the IOC had its rules around testosterone suppression. It was clear that wasn't really working great, and so the international federations, the individual sports wanted to look at it, and so World Athletics set this meeting up. It was in Lausanne in Switzerland, and I went there for the day for this meeting, and I think probably 7 or 8 different sports were there. There was about 30 different people: lawyers, medics, sports science specialists, trans groups, and me. So I was there to speak for women, and it was a very hostile meeting. People didn't want me there. I had to fight to speak. I had to say things that I knew people didn't want to hear. You know, it was really uncomfortable. It was. I should say it was the worst meeting I've ever been in my life, to be honest. I was told a few times not to use certain words. Someone came up to me at lunchtime to have a quiet word in my ear that I would probably get on much better if I didn't use certain words. These were just basic words like male puberty, things like that. I wasn't I wasn't being offensive in any way, because I go out of my way to be polite in these meetings. I certainly don't leave any open goals for people to attack me. So, I just had to hold my ground. I really had to hold it, but it was difficult because the pressure that they put on me to comply, to back down, was immense. But there was a shocking moment when and I won't name names on this, but there was quite a respected female lawyer that was there, human rights lawyer, and I'd contacted her before the meeting to say I was going to be there, and I'd really like to just have a moment to chat with her, over lunch or something, and she didn't get back to me. Anyway, in the meeting, at the break, I went over and introduced myself, and I said, could we just chat over lunch? I'd be interested in a few of your thoughts on things. And to my face, she refused. She just said, no, I've got nothing extra, nothing I can tell you. No, I won't speak to you. And I literally, I just couldn't believe it, that people wouldn't even talk about it. It was as if even being seen speaking to me in the room would have undermined somebody, that other people would have seen that they're talking to the turf, and that was where, that was in 2019, and that's the kind of battles that we're having to have. We have to battle to get into those meetings, but then when we're there, God, we're put under pressure, and it's scary, it's although I put on the front that I was confident and I was there to get a job done, but God, underneath it was horrible. It was unpleasant, and I'll say, after that meeting at the end, when I went back to my hotel room, I burst into tears. It was that kind of day where I'd had to fight every moment. But that's what we have to do, and that's what I hope. It's those types of things that open doors for other people. Then is someone had to be the first one to go in that room and normalize it.
What year did that happen?
2019, that meeting was.
And a lot has changed since then.
It has.
Since then, we've seen the monstering of Martina Navratilova on Twitter for her making similarly 100% scientifically based statement about men in sports. Now, as the listeners can tell, I don't even use the word male in this context, simply because part of me, Nick, thinks that it's great to do the work that we do, especially you. You're doing advocacy, I'm doing journalism, but I found myself at the other end of an NUJ document telling me how I had to refer to these men. And I thought, whoa, no, this is Orwellian when I have to be dictated how to write, what pronouns to use, etc. Now, I really appreciate your work because you've gotten right at the throat of the dragon, as it were. You are addressing agencies such as World Athletics, and you had a chat with Martina Navratilova as well about this issue. I'm wondering if you could talk about not only that discussion, but maybe also what do you think influenced Martina to move on from taking what many think was a harder line position in those weeks and months following the hazing of her on Twitter, to then forming a sports NGO, which is considering and is more gentle-handed about men and women's sports?
Yeah, the conversation with Martina was one of those highlights of of this work. There's some really tough bits, that I've just explained about, like, being in those meetings. But then there are moments of joy where you realise this is what keeps you going. So the opportunity to speak to Martina was amazing, and that's one of the things I'll always remember. I mean, I always, as a girl, would watch her play. She was a real idol for me, and there I was speaking to her. But what started is I'd seen on Twitter that she'd mentioned, she was spotting a few things on Twitter. So this was before she came out and spoke about it. And I thought, well, do you know what? Sometimes you just have to try to connect with somebody. And, I'd managed to DM her, and I just sort of laid it out. And I said, look, there's a problem here for lesbians. Please don't think that we are, we're not anti anybody, but we're sticking up for ourselves, and there's a problem with lesbians. And I think she could see that, and I think that spurred her into looking into this more. And so she agreed to have a conversation, and we chatted on the phone. And it was after that she then said a little bit more, and then obviously once she started, everyone jumped on that, and it blew up into a crazy thing. I mean, she was shocked at the response. She wasn't prepared for that. I'd suggested to her that it might be that there would be backlash, but I think until you receive the backlash, you don't quite realise how enormous it would be. And I think the first thing that happened is that she was dropped as an ambassador for this organisation called Athlete Ally, I think it's called, something like that. And I think what it shows is if somebody like Martina, an absolute, God, I mean, if there's an ambassador for LGBT people, God, it's Martina, isn't it? If she can be considered a bigot, if she can be dropped by her own community in the way that she was, that just shows there's a hell of a problem. So she that spurred her into action, and it's been great to see her doing more. And of course, after that, we got Sharon Davis involved, or other people, and that's been a fantastic part of this journey. But I think one of the funniest moments, and which was surreal for me, was when I was having a chat with Martina on the phone, and in the background, her wife was calling, asking her what did they want to have for dinner. And so I sort of heard them in the background discussing that they were going to have fish that night, and sorting out lunch while I was chatting to her. And it was amazing. It was one of those memories that I'll always chuckle over, really. Speaking to an icon while she decides what she's going to have for dinner.
But then after she was really attacked quite badly on Twitter, months later, she did form an organization that was much softer on the question. It didn't necessarily backtrack on her comments, but it did to many feminists. Many feminists read this as sort of a defiance of her original denouncement of men and women's sports. What are your thoughts on the organization that takes to task the idea that no men should be included in women's sports? That's basically making room for certain trans-identified men to be in women's sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think Martina's focus now is on elite sport, and trying to hold the rules that we've got rather than advance them. Because, of course, in America, there's a slightly different context in that they've got the problem of basically self-identifying into sport. You've got the CC Telfler and various other young trans males that are getting scholarships to run in girls and women's university teams, things like that. So they've got that issue, and so I think Martina is certainly very clear that shouldn't be allowed. They shouldn't be then there needs to be some rules involved. And so I think their strategy is to hold the line that self-ID must not come in. It must be, at the very least, some type of testosterone suppression. Now, I differ there, and I come away, I have a different view to Martina on that one, in that, and this is from the scientific point of view, that actually reducing testosterone isn't enough to eliminate all of that male advantage. So it's not good enough. I want to see those rules changed. I want the testosterone limit to be discarded because it doesn't work. Because unfortunately, the reality is, as much as somebody would like to find a way to have fairness and safety and inclusion in sport, it's just impossible. You can't. Once you've been through male puberty, you've got the advantage. So I differ from Martina on that one, in that I think testosterone suppression can't be the answer. It's not a good enough compromise. And also I think that amateur sport matters too. And in fact, I think in a way amateur sport matters more, or certainly as much as elite sport, because so many women play amateur sport. It touches so many women's lives. Whereas elite sport is a few women that lose out on places. But grassroots sport, girls wanting to get into sport, women wanting to play sport as a hobby, that's important to people's lives. There's a huge push to get more women to play sport because we're underrepresented in sport. Yet at the same time, we've got this policy that takes away all the fun and fairness out of sport because we allow males to play. And there's this ridiculous situation that we're looking at the moment in cricket, where I know that there's a sort of a relatively low level club. It's not a top county level. It's just in the development league. They've got a trans player, and the other teams have to play against this person, which it's clearly unfair. And what we've got are girls, 13-year-old girls, have to play women's cricket because there aren't enough girls who play cricket. So there's not enough to make their own teams up. So women's cricket at the low levels starts at the age of 13. So you've got a 13-year-old girl being bowled at by a 6'2", 40-year-old male. And it's dangerous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And girls don't want to play. They don't want to do it. Parents don't want to let their girls play. That's the reality of how these policies impact. Girls just disappear out of the sport.
The cricket ball is made out of what material?
Well, it's damn hard, put it that way. I think it's leather coated, and I don't know what but it's a hard ball. I mean, you have to wear protective gear to play cricket for a reason, and being either bowled at or hit with a ball from the bat, people do get injured. So people break fingers. People, it's a dangerous sport. Not as dangerous as rugby, but it's dangerous. And so we do need to think about that. And so we're talking to the English Cricket Board about their policy, and it's hard work because they are so caught up in the trans ideology. They really struggle to see the problem.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. Aside from cricket, there is the wider debate of people like Laura Penny, Owen Jones, who are recalcitrant in their views. They will not even cede the idea that sex is a reality. Now, we're up against the wall with these types because these are people in the media who are putting out series of articles about how gender is now somatic and sex is an ideology. This is what they are part of spinning in this machinery today. So when you go to like World Athletics in Switzerland, you're told not to mention men. When you're dealing with a multiple winner of Wimbledon on the phone who's afraid to speak out, and then you take the ONS to court to stop them from redefining sex in the census, we're talking about institutional capture on a global scale. Now, how is it that women such as yourself, many other women who formed their own groups, individual women who are out there letter writing to the BBC, ITV, because they had a show about women in sports and didn't include, surprise, surprise, not one woman. And all of the individuals and groups being involved in this, since you and I met on a Facebook group discussing this subject about 2017. So, how is it that women are the David in this scenario with the slingshot, fighting not one Goliath, many Goliaths that are paid by big donors, the pharma industry, and so much money is supporting the churning out of their messages, such that we have made a lot of headway in this debate, because now, from 2017 to now, it's opposite day. Now women are starting to be heard. Now, well, The Guardian isn't exactly covering our voices much, but we had news from The Spectator recently that there is a tussle at the head of The Guardian between various power heads and what is being really linked to the gender wars and the undoing of that publication. So you've voiced your concern for lesbians and young lesbians, especially. Like you, I agree that amateur sports is more important because it's something that most of us do. Even if we only do it for 1 year in high school or 1 year in university, we do it, all of us. Where the Martina Navratilovas are very few. They're not even the 1%. They're less. They are symbolically important for all of us. But we're looking at a world where we're having to face this wave of disinformation from the media, from public policy makers like cancer research that tells women, one can only wonder how an immigrant woman from Bangladesh will understand a banner that says cervix havers get checked, right? And all these other organizations that have been bought out by Stonewall, and they are able to spin a narrative that is not only in direct contradiction to science, not only in direct contradiction to the legal rights of women in prison or women in sports, but they are also really anti-science in every way and logic. So we're having to fight a very Orwellian battle here. We're fighting people who are saying that 2 + 2 is 5. And we're making headway. But what do you see as the bigger hurdles that are remaining, especially since your big victory against the ONS?
Well, I mean, you're right. This idea of institutional capture, that's at the heart of this, and that's the danger, I think, because we've got the lobby, we've got the big pressure groups like Stonewall, Gendered Intelligence, others, and they're very good at what they do. They've got a lot of money. They've got the staff. They've got everything. They are the Goliath in this. But actually, lobby groups lobby. That's what they do. So we almost can't blame Stonewall for pushing at an open door, because that's their objective, isn't it? Who I blame and who need to get their house in order are the large institutions that have allowed their staff to become captured. And that was what we saw with the ONS case. What had happened there is that the actual staff within the ONS, very high up senior people within the ONS, had essentially turned into trans activists. They were doing the lobbying within the organisation to push through the ideology. Stonewall were nowhere to be seen really at this point. Stonewall could have got clean hands when it comes to the ONS issue, because they'd already got staff members doing their work for them. And that's why it's so difficult to reverse this, because we're up against senior people within large organisations pushing through their pet projects. And that was what was happening at the ONS and the census. There were people there who were wedded to the idea that sex was self-identified, and it was impossible to break through. You start off with these things in good faith. You think, well, I'll be involved in the stakeholder work. We act in good faith. We talk about the issues. We have the arguments. We put the case. But in the end, it was clear that the ONS were not going to budge on it, and that was why, in the end, we took the case, because we'd worked on this for over 18 months with them, and still they just threw it away and decided that they would just do what they were going to do anyway. And all that was left was the courts. And they took a gamble. They thought that we weren't going to take it to court. They underestimated us, and they thought they were powerful. They could, in the end, just do what they wanted. And I think that was why I decided in the end to really take this case and to take the gamble, because it was a gamble. It's because we had to show that David, in the David and Goliath, would not back down. We would go that extra mile. We would go. We were those crazy people that would take you to court if you don't do it properly. And it was a huge amount of work. A lot of people were involved behind the scenes. But we got to court in such a short period of time. God, the pressure to do it was immense. The fundraising that we had to do within a few weeks, we raised £100,000. It was amazing. I mean, it was a real roller coaster. It was exciting. And then when we won, it was amazing. Absolutely brilliant. And I just hope that, although obviously that was an important win for the census, it was the message that it gave across to all the other institutions, is that don't mess with us, because we will take you to court. We will win. We will raise that money, and we will hold you to account.
For our listeners outside of the UK, can you explain what that decision actually translates to? The ONS is the Office of National Statistics.
Yeah, so basically the Office of National Statistics, every 10 years, there is a national census. And that census it's mandated by law that everybody must answer the questions asked by the census. And one of the questions that is asked is, what is your sex? And this year, for the first time, a new question's been added, which is, what's your gender identity? And that's fine. Great. I think we need to know. We need to understand how many trans people there are in the country. Important information. And so the solution had been to ask two questions: what is your sex, male or female, and then what's your gender identity? So that's a voluntary question people could ask, and that would have been fine. But the trans lobbyists weren't satisfied with that. They wanted the sex question to be answered according to gender identity. So they kind of wanted two bites at the cherry, So, and we said, no, well, actually, sex means something. The question is, what is your sex? And so in the end, there was going to be some guidance, some sort of small print that was to explain to people what that question meant. And the ONS had basically said people could put whatever's on their official documents, which some of them could have been self-identified documents. And we said, no, that's against the law. The law says Parliament decided that the question was, what is your sex? And sex means either, it's your legal sex, it's what's on your birth certificate, or if you've legally changed it. And, it was a legal question that we then won in court. So that it was a principle that we had to win, that sex isn't the same as gender identity. And basically the ONS didn't have the right to redefine it. It has that, Parliament puts down these laws. And if we are going to change the law, it has to be done in public, in Parliament, with everybody involved, not behind closed doors with a few people at the ONS. And so that's what we won in court, the principle that sex means sex. I mean, that's all we're asking for. Gender identity, fine. Do what you want with gender identity, but leave sex alone. Sex means something too, and it's important to us. So keep it.
That was a great win. But then, of course, that leaves many spectators or readers of columns about your win. Why was that seemingly easier to get done than cleaning up women's sports, than safeguarding women in prisons? The illogicity of the trans movement that says, but these quote unquote trans women are endangered by these men, doesn't bear through logic, because logically we know back to the sports issue that the strength, the body size, etc. of these men is much greater, much larger than those of most women. So it's not a case of, I hate the Michael Phelps, defense. Oh, but Michael Phelps is a freak of nature, so everything else follows. No, there's actually a visible physical scientific difference in strength that men have over women. So what has gone on that the prison system seems to be inordinately worried about effeminate men in prison, safeguarding them, but not about women, especially when we know, again, statistically, that women in prison have a much higher rate of physical domestic violence than the rest of society.
Yeah, well, I mean, the issue with the census was a legal question that we knew we would win that in court because it was written down in law that sex meant sex. The issue with prisons and the issue with sport is a lot more complex because it's a balancing of rights. It's a balancing of different interests. And then that's very difficult to get. It's not a straightforward legal question. And so, we've just had the prisons policy analysed in court, and the prison service it was ruled that the prison service is lawful, that the policy that they have is lawful. I would say it's wrong. It's not morally right, but technically it didn't break any laws, and that's all court can do, rule on. But the issue with prisons is, the problem is that males who identify as women are being given equal value and equal sort of considerations to females in prison. And so the idea is that, well, we need to balance the rights. So that balance means that we'll let the males into the women's prisons, but we'll put a few safeguards in there. We'll have some extra guards to keep the women safe, that kind of thing. Now, that's the problem with the idea of balancing and thinking that people have equal rights to a women's space. How we've got to that point where somebody thinks that the rights of a male sex offender are equivalent to the rights of a female person to have, a male-free space in prison. It is ludicrous. I mean, it really is ludicrous. But it's a very difficult one to undo. It's a very difficult one to row back from now that we're there. And it will take time, and it will take public opinion, I think, to push this back. It needs to get to a point where everybody realises that no, that is not the fair balance. Because fair balance is relative, isn't it? It's subjective, really. It's about what value does society put on different things for different groups. And at the moment, for whatever reason, trans rights are given what I think is an unreasonable amount of weight, and women's rights are given, they're not really considered important. That's misogyny in action, isn't it? And so when it then comes to the balancing, where does that fair balance lie? Well, the fair balance is wrong. The wrong balance is struck. So the prisons are doing the right. They're not doing anything illegal, because the court has said, yeah, they are supposed to balance the rights of both. They've put in some safeguards for women, but they've also allowed men in. That's balanced. That's a good compromise. That's lawful. But we need to get to a point where nobody in their right mind would see that as fair balance. And so that's where we need to get the public involved. Everybody needs to sort of reset their moral compass on this, really. Value women in prison, and see that, sometimes it's okay to say no to trans people, because sometimes what they want is inappropriate. And for some males to want to be in women's prisons, I'm sorry, but that's inappropriate. There has to be a line that can't be crossed. And that's what we have to get to.
This is the issue, though, where sex and gender, this is what the debate's been about for several years, are being pit against each other. But there is a problem where the ONS decision recognizes that sex and gender are not the same, nor are they on the same platform. One can identify as many things. I just discussed with Naomi Cunningham about this. If I insist I am the best cook in the world, I don't think I have any legitimate right to claim employment discrimination if my colleagues at work do not mirror my delusion. And I think that we need to start addressing as a society, especially those of us on the left, this conundrum. I've been speaking about this lately because I'm a bit obsessed with it, but it's the idea that yes is good and no is bad. The left deems that yes is good and no is bad. I think we need to learn a bit from the conservatives, frankly. I think we need to start looking at things case by case. How can one be talking about, let's say, Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement and understand that there were many, many women who said no to Harvey Weinstein, and he did not accept no? This is what rape is. Why is it that women cannot say no? Suddenly, the wokerati on the left, they are mostly on the left, could not handle that and cannot handle that. We're talking about a systemic misogyny that is taking place on the left specifically. Now, how is it that Martina was hounded so badly that other athletes are so pestered in this that some are afraid to speak up? Because even in semi-professional women's sports, and I've spoken to them, I'm sure you have as well, they will lose their backers, and they're already far underfunded compared to their male counterparts. So many people have said, well, the Tokyo Olympics would be a good place for women to just say, no, I'm not competing. And this might be an option, considering that even the Olympics are now being contemplated as being canceled once again because of the virus. But I'm just wondering what our options are, because as you rightfully said, no one cares about women's safety in prisons. We saw this with the scene in Dallas, Texas, or it was Fort Worth, right next to Dallas, where two women raised complaints about being sexually assaulted by men in the prison. To what degree, Nick, basically, this is what I'm asking, are we doing ourselves an own goal by even conceding that men can identify as women? Not to be mean to these people, but you and I both know that no doctor will tell an anorexic to lose weight. No doctor will tell someone who's been kidnapped and is suffering from Stockholm syndrome to get married to their kidnapper once they're out of jail. No, but this is the one psychiatric pathology where somehow it's been captured across the board by every institution, and everyone is now being pressured to concede the emperor has new clothes. Might it be time that women across the board stop even being nice a little bit? I'm talking about, let's just stop using that language. Might that help the issue more, do you think?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one because I mean I get criticised by both sides of the debate. You know, I'm not. I disappoint both sides sometimes. You know, I'm not. You know, by being what I would call moderate, you know, I can annoy feminists and I also annoy trans activists. You know, some women think that I don't go far enough with saying that trans women are men, for example. But you know, actually, what I want to do is I want to make things change. And you have to live in the real world, in the now. And in the now, we are at the point where the general public or policymakers or the people that we need to persuade, I don't think are at the point that can take language that would feel to them offensive. Now, I'm not saying that that language is offensive, but I need to persuade, I need to get people to listen to me. And I'm at the point where I know that even saying that trans women go through a male puberty is almost off limits. That if I said to them trans women are men, the door would be shut in my face and I wouldn't get anywhere. So I'd rather get in the room, talk about things, let people realise, you know, we're only going to get further. We're only to get another step forward if people will listen to us and talk to us. We're not talking about getting the extreme trans rights activists to understand or to compromise. I'm talking about ordinary people, the ordinary people in policy rooms that are making these decisions about sports or prisons or whatever. We need them to realise that we have some legitimate points. Remember that they already consider us, that we've already been demonised in their eyes. So one of the things we have to do is just to show that we're decent people. You know, so that's one of the things that I try to do. So I can sometimes be criticised for not being clear enough, for not being hard enough on certain issues, and that it looks like compromise, it looks like weakness, but actually it's not. It's about a clear-headed way of getting into the room that I need to get into so that I can have the conversation. And there's some language that today isn't possible to use. And although it might be nice to have been able to have used it, we have to live in the real world. So I don't use the phrase trans women are men. I will use preferred pronouns, but in policy meetings, I will be clear that I'm talking about male people, I'm talking about sex. And in fact, where pronouns are irrelevant at that point, you know, whether trans women are women, whether that mantra is correct is irrelevant. It's about sex being different to gender identity, and I try to talk about it in those terms. So I think it's important that some women do take a stronger stance than I do. They have a different role to play in this. But I want to get into a policy meeting. I want to be heard by skeptics. And so there are certain things that I have to do. And I do that in a way that I have certain lines that I don't cross. And there are certain things that, you know, and I will be absolute with that. But there are battles that I don't need to get embroiled in. Pronouns is one. So that's where I've made my position. That's where I am on this.
The thing is, as you well know, the trans activists have used language to struggle up their hill. Their battle is being waged through words. There's a wonderful French Tunisian anthropologist who I love, Jean Favretzada, who wrote, "The act in witchcraft is the word. In witchcraft, words wage war. Nobody ever talks about witchcraft to gain knowledge, but to gain power." And I keep thinking about her words there because she wrote an entire book on the power of words in witchcraft in the Bocage in France. And the trans activists have been waging this through words. That's how they got the IOC on board. That's how they got the prison system on board. That's how they got the NUJ on board to tell me how to write about them. No other group in history has had that kind of power.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The language is absolutely crucial to this. But I think we have to work at it at the right pace. But each, depending on what an individual's job is in this area, you know, I'm trying to achieve different things to other people. Then we need to use the language that's right for the moment. And I push it as far as I can go to be effective. So I think that's, you know, it's a judgment call. It's a really contentious area because it is absolutely right that it's the language that has messed this up. And if we were starting from the beginning, we certainly wouldn't be conceding any ground because it's the language that has messed it up. And, you know, the mantras, trans women are women, has been so powerful. But it's extremely difficult to row back from that at this moment. And so I'm holding on with my fingernails to the words male and female, like my life depends on it, you know, rather than getting distracted or injured or disregarded by battles around the word woman. Although I will say that I am working with IPSO at the moment on, so this is the press regulator for newspapers. There is an area there where we're seeing headlines, and there was one just the other day, woman found with 1,000 images of child porn, for example, or woman rapes child, all sorts of ridiculous headlines. And of course, they're not women. We're talking about transgender people, we're talking about males, we're talking about men. And it's extremely important that we get the guidance change from IPSO to stop people using those headlines. That if when it comes to an area where someone's sex matters, and when it comes to crime, it does. Their sex matters there. It matters if it's a woman that's committed the crime compared to a man, because a man committing a sexual crime is commonplace. A woman doing it is rare. And so you get clickbait headlines with if people are using the word woman instead of male or trans woman or just not using it at all. I mean, there's no need to even define someone's sex in a headline. So there is an important battle to be won there, is that we mustn't, in common language, when the word woman is used, most people, most readers will read it and understand that to mean a female person. And therefore, we mustn't be tricking people or misleading people in the press by using the word woman to mean some ideological sense of being a woman. So we're doing quite a lot of work on that behind the scenes, trying to protect the word woman. So the word woman should only be used if it means a female. And if you're not referring to a female, don't use that word woman. So I'm not going as far as to say the headline must say man rapes a child, but just simply don't use the word man or woman, and make sure it's clear in the text that that person identifies as transgender. If they have to use female pronouns, because that's what the court did, that has to happen in the press, but it needs to be clear. People mustn't be misled. And I think that's all we can really do at this time. I mean, I think we need to go further than that over years. Language needs to be corrected. But we've got a long journey ahead there, and we can only do so much at once. And like I say, I always go back to what can I achieve? What's the most effective thing I can do now to achieve some change?